This podcast is presented by Rabbi Peretz Muchkin, speaking to the millennial generation.
Well, you mentioned that it's your birthday on the 10th of March, the secular calendar, and it made me wonder what significance do we as Jews place on birth dates? I know, in Indian philosophy, they have the Vedic calendar. We've obviously heard about the Gregorian calendar, and do we place any significance on the days people were born? Is it linked to the Parsha and what happened kind of in biblical times, or is there another significance?
So I don't know when it stopped, because it's surely birthdays are in Judaism. We know the dates of enough Jewish characters to know that they cared, right? If they didn't care, they wouldn't have kept the dates. Everything was so intentional in Jewish carrying. For example, next week is Purim, when my Hebrew birthday is, and I'm the full moon. So I one of the reasons I'm attracted to my Hebrew birthday is because it's always on the full moon. So I get this specific natural connection. It feels more than the sun, which could be, any random day, but this is always a full moon. It always excites me. But you could celebrate both birthdays. Fantastic. And I'll get to that quickly. Is we know Moses's birthday was the 7th of Adar, and the 7th of Adar. Well, this year is a leap year, so it was really last month. Otherwise, it would actually be in a day or two again. But basically, Moses's birthday, Haman doesn't consider the birthdays a thing, and he doesn't think the Jews think the birthdays are a thing. And then he goes, "Oh, Adar is a good time to kill the Jews because that's when Moses has died." And he doesn't know that Moses's birth was on the same day, and the birth cancel out the death, because being alive in a body makes a bigger mark than passing away. Although passing away is a huge loss, but it's only a loss because you were alive, because you were real. And because of that realness, even if, God forbid, on the earliest stages, somebody passed away, it doesn't matter the level of tragedy. It matters that you were alive, and now we can't feel that sense. So that means the living part is the more important, which would make the birthday. But what's incredible is that the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, is the one who brought back birthdays. He made it a key campaign that people should find their moon birthday and celebrate it. And when people said, "What about my secular birthday?" I said, celebrate that too. So you could say it's just because he was into celebrating life, which is a good enough reason. Or you could say that now that we live in a more open life for Jewish people, we have the opportunity to bring back traditions that may have not felt essential to our survival. So that means part of shedding a survival mentality is actually your birthday, according to the Rebbe, that by finding your birthday.
Yeah, and just to dig into that, I guess, I realized I've never asked you why we follow the lunar calendar as opposed to another calendar. And I was reading a parsha last night, and it mentioned that we're not supposed to follow the traditions of other peoples. And I wondered, of course, there were people following the sun, during biblical times. Why do we follow the moon per se, and why do we follow the lunar calendar?
Well, first of all, we kind of follow both because Shabbat is a solar calendar holiday, right? Every 7 days, that's a sun thing. That's not a moon cycle. But when the Jewish people leave Egypt, they're told the first mitzvah they get is to follow the moon. They're told, you want to leave Egypt, you got to follow the moon. Why do they have to follow the moon? Well, there's so many layers, but one layer is the moon is actually more of a representation of deeper reality than the sun is. Because the sun is somewhat mythical, where it's just the same thing happens every single day. The clouds or the energy we derive from the sun, it doesn't affect the sun. The sun has really no deep connection per se to Earth, other than we absorb energy from it. Whereas the moon is deeply connected. It's our moon. It's part of our orbit. It's deeply connected to the magnetical pull of our life. And that is more reminiscent of us, where we are in an orbit of sorts. A human being is in their own little universe, and they're constantly, filling themselves, in the sense where, let's put it this way: the moon is reflective energy. which means it's inclusive of the energy around it and then reflects it off itself. And
Right.
that is a real part of being human.
Yeah, and that reminds me, you've said in the past, Hashem is the source of light, whereas we're just a manifestation and a reflection of that divinity. And so the moon also, absorbs and reflects the light in a way
Right.
that's quite human, maybe.
Well, there is a deeper idea that the sun is also a form of reflection of light, but that's a more, of a metaphysical concept than it is the moon, which is actually, you see it that way. Meaning, like, the example would be that people follow righteous people because they're like, oh, they're the sun. You look at them, they're radiating with light. But the truth is, they're not really a sun. They're actually just reflective of a greater energy source. So the same thing with the sun. The sun is also a reflective of a greater energy source. It didn't make itself. It's a manifestation of creation also. It just, because of its deep consistency, we only see what it emanates. And that's sort of like, that's why the sun is sometimes connected to more of righteous people and the moon to regular people. But in Kabbalah, the moon is all humanity is like the moon, because all humanity is really a reflection of each other and of how we treat nature and how we, kind of our basic karmatic principles that even Judaism adheres by, that you are a reflection and a part of all the energy around you. So it's interesting that in order for Jews to leave their Egypt, their limitations, their box of slavery, and open themselves up and expand themselves,
follow the moon.
They got to follow the moon. That's besides that women are a representation of the moon, feminine energy is, and all of creation is really feminine. And even the man has to change the way he sees himself as like a son, where like, I just eat well and take care of myself and I'm good for years. And instead realize, no, you're actually also waxing and waning constantly. You're also feminine, which means you also have to nurture the things around you. You have to see yourself as a vessel for creating life. So it's almost like God says, you guys can't be free until you adopt your inner feminine cycle.
Amazing. So Rabbi, tell me about your birthday, and tell me about this Sedra and this Parsha.
Well, it's a very interesting connection actually to this portion, which this week when they read it, I'm going to ask for an aliyah to get called to the Torah, because I want be called up before my birthday. I always find that getting called to the Torah, the Shabbat before my birthday, is like giving me juice for the week ahead. And this week's Parsha Vayikra is all about being able to see your life as purposeful. And the Rebbe said that your birthday is God telling you you matter. Like, if you ever worried about, like, do I matter? Am I part of this? Do I need to be here? It's like, yes, that's what your birth represents. It represents purpose, meaning, and like, even if people didn't mean to have a kid, it still represents that type of meaning. So there's this incredible connection to this portion and birthdays in general, that it's really all about constantly remembering that everything in your life matters, and the way to access it is through intention. So the birthday should be spent about thinking about, like, where can I grow in my intentional and mindful practices so that I can take this idea that my life matters and invest it into everything I do. And this portion begins with the concept of sacrifices, but the cryptic wording that the Torah uses for sacrifices is actually not about sacrifices, because it's almost as if the Torah knew that wasn't going to be part of modern times, but it's about closeness. It's about creating a closeness to everything happening in your life. And that's what intentionality is creating a first degree connection to who you are and what you're occupied with. And when you have that, you can nurture your ego and your sense of self in such a strong way, because it's not a false sense. There's an ego that's for survival, that I just need to live. But the goal is not to just survive. The goal is to have an ego that says, okay, what am I here for? How can I maximize my potential? How can I use all the skills and resources that are in my life? Whether they're a little or a lot, they're always something. So this is like tapping into that is really what this portion's about and what birthdays are about. And I feel very blessed that they come together for me that way.
And can you tell me a bit more of this concept of sacrifice and closeness with respect to like the actual, like factual things that happened in this portion?
There's basically an idea that your body is essentially why you feel like an animal, or you feel like survivalism, is because a part of you is. Your body is that. So when you come on earth, there's like this sense of like, why do I need to look for indication of what should I do with my life? I could just look to nature, right? Nature operates in harmony. I should try to operate in harmony. That's how you could see there are hunters that, and especially in like Native American life, that are so refined, right? That they're connected to the land, and their hunting is not bloodthirst or just bad dieting. It's actually how they're one with the land. And that's, it's definitely my fantasy, is always like, wow, being one with earth. And then Judaism comes and says, actually, you can't hunt. Like, Jews don't hunt. We have to be able to have an integral connection to the animal if we're going to consume it. And since we're very into building life and families, we don't live nomadically. So that means hunting is off the table for us, because we have to be one with the consumption that we have. So how does one become one with their animal? Is they have to take the animal and lift it out of a survival construct.
Actually, a really good point. Sorry to interrupt on that. But yeah, now that you mention it, it's true, because in the Torah, it always talks about the sacrifices. It's the, pardon me, but like the male cow, or it's a sheep, or it's a goat, or it's a chicken, or, they're domestic animals. We're not going and sacrificing kind of like wild animals. And so I guess that's the assumption that, the animals available to us are those that we farm. We're not going out and sort of hunting wild animals and sacrificing them.
Yeah, I think there's a very direct connection to that, partly because it's like, domestication of animals was connected to wealth. And the idea that we have to take part of our abundance, part of our animal, and take it out of the realm of abundance and animal, and turn it into charitable sources, because all the sacrifices, it was really about, Jews don't consume blood for another time, but the idea was that the animals then went and fed the poor, fed the families working at the temple that had no
and you've
other
actually
income.
got to take the blood and pour it into the earth. You're not allowed to eat the blood.
That's right. And the idea of that regeneration that's supposed to happen, and you're supposed to sit and meditate on, like, if I wasn't a good person, that's essentially me not even living up to my own life. Like, there's a price to pay, and the price to pay is you have to realize that what you do in your life that you live is connected to others, and thus you need to feed others. That's like that's why the word for sacrifice in Hebrew, korban means to be close. How could I get close to my source? How do I create a connection?
And another thought that occurred to me on that, which I'd love to ask, is there's talk of animal sacrifice and human sacrifice in the Torah. How are they the same korban? Are they the same idea, or are they different ideas?
Well, there's no human sacrifice in the Torah. It's a huge no as far as like human life goes.
I mean more how, for example, how the covenant happened, where Hashem said, take your son, and what was that? That's not a sacrifice.
Beautiful. First of all, very, very apt connection. According to Maimonides, the concept of sacrifice was to eliminate sacrifice from the world, where people were always doing rituals to God and sacrifice. And the Jewish people were supposed to say, like, yeah, it looks like we're doing sacrifices, but we're actually feeding the world and feeding the needy and integrating our wealth into society and creating an infrastructure around that. And that's why Maimonides says, when Mashiach comes, if we ever rebuild a temple, we won't have sacrifices again, because that we already did that. Sacrificing is not a thing in the world. As far as Abraham's like the first initial sacrifice of the Jewish people, right, of our heritage before the Jewish people,
and
it was just
that human,
Hebrews.
I'm misusing the word, but the human sacrifice, what that became, it's also closeness, because that's the covenant that came of that with Hashem.
Listen, the beautiful words of the portion, you open up the text and it's literally exactly what you're talking about. It says, Adam ki yakriv mikem, which literally means a person that sacrifices from you. In other words, instead of saying a person who sacrifices, or a person from amongst you who brings a sacrifice, it sounds as if it's saying when you bring a sacrifice from yourself. And that's why Abraham interpreted that I got to bring a sacrifice of myself. He says, my son. And he doesn't.
So Abraham actually made that leap in his mind. He said, it's of my son, because that's the thing that's most precious to me.
Correct. Whereas he has to learn through that experience that not only it wasn't about his son, it was about like the idea that what's dearest to you, even your own children, don't really belong to you. You are a facilitator for the greater needs, and that's what sacrifice really is. The way you
Wow, and
grow,
it's
the way you
about
get out of yourself.
returning to Hashem, you know, the sun and the moon that you spoke about before. You know, it's about taking light and getting it into the source of light, and it just disappears in that. And then the sacrifice of an animal is, I guess, also about a return.
Yeah, I think, what does it mean to return to self? It's like later in the portion it says a soul that sins, and the commentators and sages say a soul could sin, and it's like, well, a soul doesn't sin. A soul is in perpetual state of connecting to the creator, but it could connect to the creator without taking the body along for the ride. And the reality is the soul's only here to bring soulfulness to the body, to bring this charge of divine energy to the forefront of life, to recognize that we're all connected. It's like in science, we've already made the leap.
That's a question. It makes me think, like, can a body without a soul sin? I don't think so.
That's also true. A body without a soul can't sin either. Very also correct, because the body doesn't sin. The body is a consumer of physicality. It's not doing it because it's sinning. I was just thinking about that.
Is the sacrifice then a mitzvah, because you're basically decoupling the body and the soul? You're saying the soul will go back to Hashem in this holy act that I'm doing, and the body's it's just you know, it's just matter. It's basically returning the soul to Hashem in that act.
Well, I would say, yeah, not only that, it's the soul. It's like the sacrifice was supposed to be an idea of how to get yourself back into alignment, is through being able to use the physicality in a way to service the greater world. And that is what being close is. It's like, how does a sacrifice help? Today, if somebody needs to make amends for something they've done, they have to go engage, you know, their wrongness, or they have to fess up to it. It's much more psychological. So prayer and Torah study are like avenues for that. But in that time, because of life being so crude, in the sense of like physicality being so confrontational of life and death and sickness and illness and life expectancy, etc., the real way to get close to like your mission again is to sacrifice some of your survival for the filling and nurturing of other people. And today we do that as well with charity.
Yeah, and one of the other really interesting parts, and I'm not learned enough to know exactly where this appears, but I remember one of the functions of sacrifice is also to cleanse the body of impurities and of illnesses. And there's a whole parsha that talks about like certain kinds of illnesses and skin conditions and etc. that need to be addressed through sacrifice and can be cleansed. And is that also along this line of what is sacrifice in the Jewish tradition?
Yeah. See, when you say it in English, the sacrifices, it feels like unobtainable. But when you say like, were these also connections and closeness and ways of like, for example, the part of doing a sacrifice for people who have like skin ailments, the Torah says that's connected to not watching your energy of speech, of letting your speech about others and yourself not being, and it's all about being able to uplift that. So even today, without the sacrifice, but we have the hundreds of years of sacrifices of the Jewish people that are embedded in our DNA of like, you know, guard your speech, have positive speech, because when it's out there, it's separate from you. And when it's separate from you, it can remain negative. And so the only way to put energy out there is to put out positive energy. Like your thoughts, if you have a negative thought, because it stays with you, you can change it to a positive thought. You know, so you're not persecuted for negative thoughts because you can change those. You could say, I thought that way, but I don't want to think that way anymore. But when you say something, it's not always yours anymore. You put it out there. So the idea of a sacrifice is the idea of like, you need God to uplift some of the energy that you have. You need to, like, part of connecting to God is also saying like, help me lift the energy that left me already, and I can't lift it myself, you know?
And it has to be a very physical, a very gross act, because like you've drifted so far through committing these transgressions or these wrong speeches, and you need something to bring you back to Hashem. And so the Torah sets out these steps that you can take to be able to return.
Yeah, when people would come to the Rebbe these days and say, help me get back to myself, the Rebbe was always like, all right, forget about that. Just go do a mitzvah. You know,
Yeah,
like
be in the world
like
of action.
yeah, like ultimately action is where real things happen. And like you hurt somebody, go help them, go talk to them, go make amends, confront the issues. Like stop worrying about what you can't do and start figuring out what you can do, because ultimately in the world of action is where it all happens. And that's what I'll do on my birthday. I'll still think deeply about like what's a new action I could take upon my life, you know, to really move forward in whatever direction is needed of me.
Awesome. Wow, there's so much there.
So much to unpack.
Yeah.
I will say last thing is that time is in Jewish tradition a spiral, meaning it comes around again, but instead of being circular, it's in an upward spiral. It's always ascending. So every year on your birthday, you revisit your birth moment, your moment of purpose, and you have an opportunity to really tap into maybe things that you haven't yet. And since I'm turning 40, one of the things that I saw in Jewish tradition is that it takes 40 years to truly understand certain wisdom. And 40 is a big number. In fact, the word Adam, which is the highest level of calling human, is Adam. Adam is not men, it's human. Adam is the ability, is like Chachma, it's 45, which is the power of what? It's 40 to the 5, and 5 represents your hand, which is about bringing things into the world. So my 40s is about integration, being able to take the wisdom I learn and talk and the good things I've done and even the negative, and integrating them into my life so that my experience now also lifts my own being. Like I'm not learning all the time. I'm also like growing from the learning. I'm not just accumulating experiences and information. I'm now learning how to put them into practice and integrate them into my life. So that's the type of thoughts that I've been having with this age.
I love that. And it's really symbolic with your 40 at 40, recording these sessions, because in this world we are, where it's difficult to travel physically, you're going out into the virtual world, going out into the globe, and being able to communicate and bring people in who may not be physically close to you. So this idea of closeness these days can actually transcend the physical through, technologies and other forms of connection that we have. So I really wish that for you, and I'm excited to be part of your community, and hopefully the actions that you do with me, I'll have the power and the opportunity to spread that to others as well. So thanks, Rabbi, for sharing.
And thank you. I appreciate you, and I appreciate sharing this moment with you.